Welcome to rural Crossroads of Butler County. In this episode, we explore the story of Whitewater. The first settlers to this area homesteaded in what is known as Milton Township, named after the first settler, Milton Snorf.
Incorporated by 1890, present-day Whitewater originated after 1885 as the railroad expanded through the township.
So join us as we explore the rural crossroads of Whitewater. Early settlers to the Milton Township took advantage of the Homestead Act. In addition to Milton Snorf, the Neiman brothers, George and Isaac, were the first settlers to arrive in Harvey County in 1869, but after a few months relocated to northwest Butler County. They located on the west branch of the Whitewater River just south of the present-day town of Whitewater. In the late summer of 1876, a group of 8 families of West Prussia Mennonites purchased land in Milton Township.
The Mennonites of West Prussia, as well as Mennonite groups from Russia and Switzerland, immigrated from Europe in order to experience religious and political freedoms. Immigrants sought an agricultural community with a clear division between church and state, and to connect with their strong belief in a pacifist culture. A group of approximately 1,000 Mennonite individuals and families left their homes and villages of West Prussia, a region of current Poland, for America in the summer of 1876, with their gaze fixed on the vast prairies of Kansas and Nebraska. This group created communities in Whitewater, Elbing, and Newton, as well as settlements in Beatrice and Jansen, Nebraska. 8 families settled in Butler County and established the Emmaus and Zion Mennonite congregations. One of the original 8 families was the Bernard Harder family. He, along with many of the families, purchased land from the Santa Fe Railroad near the Milton Township. The property is still owned by the Harder's descendants. The Harder Granary served as the official Mennonite gathering space until a church structure was completed in 1877, the Emmaus Mennonite Church of Whitewater.
It's kind of puzzling as to why Whitewater even settled. There's no timber, there's no mining, it's what was there to attract people to this community. Farming was just getting started, but the people who settled here saw an opportunity, and it became an agricultural center, really, with the construction of the flour mills and everything that followed. So.
1857 was the original Whitewater. It was called Whitewater City, and if you look on the original government land office maps, it actually shows there's 2 houses that are there, and that was located northwest of Potwin. If you follow along what was the Cherokee Trail or the Old California Trail, 1861 was the war, and so the whole area was pretty much vacated, and that was kind of the end of Whitewater City. Then there was a second Whitewater, they called it Whitewater Junction, which was at the present-day Augusta. And prior to that, there was another town that was tried to be established by the same group that actually established El Dorado. And that they found was on Indian land, and eventually Whitewater Junction was started, but that also faded out. And then the third Whitewater was only a post office, which was in Fairmount Township, and then the Whitewater that we have today. And so that is the, I guess, official city is Whitewater.
In 1874, grasshoppers came to Kansas. Sometimes referred to as the Great Grasshopper Plague of 1874, these were not innocent, cute little grasshoppers. These were what some people have referred to as Rocky Mountain locust. This breed of hoppers was much larger than the grasshoppers we know of today. They didn't simply come to Kansas. They descended on the prairies from the Dakotas to Texas. They arrived in swarms so large that they sounded like a rainstorm. These insects ate crops, but they also amazingly ate wool from live sheep, clothing off of people's backs, paper, tree, bark, and wooden tool handles were devoured. Railroad conductors reported that locomotives couldn't get traction because the insects made the rails too slippery. This devastation came at a time when many Kansas farmers were struggling just to survive and turn a crop. In Butler County, the western part of the county was the most impacted, and that included the area of Milton Township or future Whitewater. Residents tried to harvest the hoppers. They also tried to rake them into piles and burn them. The sheer numbers seemed impossible to combat, especially upon the newly arrived farmers. Finally, residents from Butler County went back east to try and secure help both in the form of money and in the hope of stronger or additional crops. Governor Thomas Osborne convened a session of the legislature to discuss aiding the farmers' plight. Help finally arrived in the fall of 1874 as people from the east donated boxcars full of aid and crops to be planted for the coming year.
For persons in the mid to late 19th century, the railroads were the lifeblood to growth. It meant life or death to a town. Whitewater's growth as a town actually originated from both railroads and the nearby community of Brainerd. In 1885, the McPherson branch of the Missouri Pacific arrived in Milton Township. A station was built approximately near the center of the Milton Township, establishing Brainerd. However, by 1887, the Rock Island Railroad built a rail line through the township as well and created a junction with Missouri Pacific's line. At this junction, a depot was built and Whitewater platted. Perhaps seeing opportunity, Chester Smith moved his home from nearby Annalee in January of 1888, the first home for Whitewater. Soon after Mr. Smith's move and the addition of a few more residences, in an interesting twist, practically the whole town of Brainerd, 35 businesses and houses, packed up and moved the 2.5 miles to Whitewater.
In 1885 is when what we knew as the Missouri Pacific went across from east to west. And then in 87, they started building the railroad from north to south. And it came down through Peabody and Elbing. And the original intent was to go towards Brainerd with the railroad. And I could show you on a map, just north of Whitewater, between Whitewater and Elbing, the railroad turns from going straight south off to the southwest and comes through this area. There's always a lot of speculation as to how that happened, what caused that. And of course, those that want to generate some excitement in that will insist that George Nyman convinced the railroad, perhaps even paid the railroad, to bring the railroad through his quarter section, which is what eventually became Whitewater. Thing we have to remember about that, the trains in that time, even in the mid 1880s, a steam engine could only go 17, 20 miles without refilling. And their water. Well, there was no water supply at Brainerd. But at Whitewater, we had the river and we had good wells that they later found too. So I have a couple of pictures of the huge water towers that were just right here on the west edge of Whitewater, and that's where the trains refilled with their water. So it was probably the water that made the turn in the laying of the railroad towards Whitewater rather than over to Brainerd. However, that curve that I just referred to is oftentimes, or has been in the past, referred to as the Nyman curve. So they still think that George Nyman had something to do with it. And it could be no more than saying, hey guys, we got water over here, and you're not going to find that at Brainerd.
An interesting facet of Whitewater history is the Whitewater Flour Mill. Built by R.H. Farr in 1899, it was reported to be the largest grain station in the county by 1906. The mill produced such best-selling brands as Home Queen and Whitewater Rose, and proudly advertised their self-rising flour. At one point, the mill reported a flour business of 116,000 barrels of flour, 75% of which was self-rising. Over the decades, the Whitewater flour mill grew into a company with acquisitions in different parts of the state. For a 7-year period, the mill was used by Nabisco to make cream of wheat. In its peak years, over 30 employees helped run the mill, making it the largest employer for the town.
And a group of us farmers, Mennonites and myself, bought that in 1973 and opened it up. They had run a mill. They made flour. Whitewater Rose was the brand name. They had sold all the packaging equipment, all of the labels. So we bought just the machinery that was there, and we expected to sell the machinery. But they asked me to serve as a manager, and we opened up May the 1st, I think 1974, and we were just driving along, taking grain and selling livestock feed and fertilizer, and the phone rang, and it was Cal Atkinson, the vice president of Nabisco, asked what we're doing with the flour mill. I said, well, it's just sitting there. And he wanted to know if they could come down and visit with us. And a week later, he was there, and the Mennonite ladies made them a home-cooked Mennonite meal, which they enjoyed. And we ate in the flour mill, in the warehouse. They polished the floors and ate in there. And we wound up with a contract making cream of wheat for Nabisco for a number of years. By the train car load, we made 12 train car loads a month of cream of wheat. That's a few bowls. Anyway, that's so we ran that until 1989 and sold it. And we had 25 employees at one time. But we bought it from the Zimmermans, who had had it since, I don't know, the early 40s. The older gentleman was at one time associated with the Ross people, who owned the mill in Newton. And so we inherited all that facility and operated then as a grain elevator, farm supply store for a number of years. That was our livelihood.
Whitewater's home. And home is where not only things or places, but particularly people are familiar. And that's what Whitewater is. It's a place that I've been acquainted with for a long time, all my life, and I can call it home.
Whitewater has a great story of farming and faith.
Join us in 2 weeks as we explore the rural crossroads of Latham.